my name is Heather and welcome to the Myth Rose channel. Today's video is part 1 in a deep dive into polyester, and the first part is going to be all about the history of polyester. I will be answering questions like how did it come to be, who came up with making fabric from oil, when was it invented, and how between its invention and now did it become the most widely used fiber on the planet. And I'll add timestamps for each subheading so you can skip around if you like. In part 2 of my deep dive into polyester, I will be talking about its life cycle, qualities as a textile, its environmental and human impact, and much more. I'm planning for that video to be uploaded in 3 to 4 weeks after this one. If it's already up, there will be a link in the description below and a card at the end of this video. Until now, my channel has been a random spattering of videos like this one, makings of, and tutorials, but I've decided to stop being a doofus and run with what's working, which has been my deep dive fabric videos. So from now on, I hope to post a new video every 3 to 4 weeks. These videos take a lot of research and editing, so I don't think I'll be able to do more than that. And that's a lot of time in between videos for you to remember to check up on my channel and see if you've missed anything. So be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you can get a notification when I upload a new video. Speaking of subscribers, I now have 248, slowly but surely creeping up there. Thank you very much. You'll all be able to brag someday that you recognize the worth of this channel before it blew up. And speaking of being a real YouTuber, I had my first troll encounter. I also inadvertently discovered how to get rid of them. Be nice and engage as if it's a normal conversation. Apparently that's not what they're looking for. Alright, on with it. Polyester. First, a short explanation of what polyester is for the uninitiated, because this channel is for all levels of knowledge. Unlike natural fibers, polyester is totally synthetic, and therefore part of the explanation of what it is chemistry. Polyester is any group of polymers that consist basically of repeated units of an ester and are used especially in making fibers or plastics. This is from Webster's, by the way. So, okay. But what's a polymer? A polymer is a chemical compound or mixture of compounds formed by polymerization and consisting essentially of repeating structural units. But what is polymerization? Chemical reaction in which two or more molecules combine to form larger molecules that contain repeating structural units. But what are molecules? No, okay, no. This is the history lesson, not a chemistry lesson. I can't understand and read chemistry. I don't know what the hell is going on here. I just know that's made from oil. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, the textile polyester is a specific material. It most commonly refers to the type called polyethylene terephthalate. Oh man, I've been reading these words for weeks now, but I haven't said them out loud. Okay, polyethylene terephthalate, or PET, which is what disposable water bottles are made of, and that's why those water bottles can be recycled into clothing. Basically, all you need to know is that polyester is a plastic thread made from oil, and then it's woven or knitted or bonded into a fabric. Okay, that's better. That really wasn't a sitting dress. Alright, so the history of polyester. Both, because their stories are very closely related and build on one another, so buckle up. In the 1920s, chemists understood the basic structure of common natural substances, but not polymers. At the time, it was hypothesized that they may be a collection of molecules held together, but by what? They didn't know what they were held together by. Then, in 1926, a German man named Hermann Staudinger proposed that polymers were macromolecules, or really big molecules, but he couldn't come up with any evidence. So naturally, he was branded crazy, and then later given the Nobel Prize for this work. One of the organic chemists he presented this hypothesis to was quoted as saying, "We are shocked like zoologists would be if they were told that somewhere in Africa an elephant was found who was 1,500 feet long and 300 feet wide." So he thought that polymers were macromolecules, macro meaning big. So he thought there was molecules out there that they had somehow just missed that were 2 or 3 times the size of other molecules. The next year at the new DuPont Research Lab, a man named Wallace Carothers was on a mission to determine what polymers were, and he just so happened to believe in 300-foot elephants. He used acids and alcohols to produce the first esters, with which he formed a long chain to produce the first polyester. So he had set out to create these macromolecules, but the molecular weight of his polyester was less than 6,000, which means absolutely nothing to me, but is apparently much smaller than many biological substances and is therefore not very macro at all. He did, however, notice that the chemical reaction was creating a lot of water as well as the esters. So he acquired a molecular still, cutting-edge technology at the time. But he made his deputy, Julian Hill, do all the work. Typical. Using the still is a long process, so Carothers actually wasn't in the lab when the first polyester fibers were made. A long chain of esters was held together by an ordinary chemical bond, the molecular weight of which was 12,000. It was a macromolecule. Product of this work was a stretchy polymer that, when touched with a glass rod, yielded a festoon of fibers, the quote from one of the people who was there. Apparently, Hill and the other lab employees were super excited when this happened, and they stretched the fibers like up and down the hallways and like all around the laboratory, I guess. I'm assuming this was super fun, and Carothers wasn't even there. They were having like a party with this new stretchy synthetic thread. So it turned out Hermann Staudinger had been right all along, and a mere 26 years later, he got the Nobel Prize. Moving on to the 30s, in 1931, Carothers shared his findings with the world in a paper called polymerization. Remember, we've already heard that word. And that September, Carothers and Hill announced to the whole world, like not just the scientific world, that they had invented or discovered, I don't know what you would call it in this situation, the world's first 100% synthetic fiber. Problem, however, with this fiber was that it had a very low melting point. So like if you put it in hot water to wash it, or maybe left out in the sun or sweat too much in it, I don't know, it would melt. So it was not good for clothing. But it seems that there was a few years before they did anything else with it, so nothing happened. So Carothers is still working in the DuPont laboratory, but they're letting him do projects that he decides what he wants to work on. So he's just tinkering around trying to discover things until 1934, when the lab decides it needs to make some money. So they tell him he has to come up with a polyamide that can tolerate hot water and dry cleaning fluid, which ends up only taking him a few months, and by 1935 they have nylon thread. But unfortunately, before the world goes crazy for nylon, and it did, Carothers killed himself by taking a cyanide pill. Moving on, nylon first made it to market in 1938, not as clothing, but as toothbrush bristles, to everyone's delight, because the old animal hair bristles would get mushy and fall out. Sounds disgusting. I mean, I hate how ubiquitous synthetic fibers are, but I think I'm glad about toothbrush bristles. Yeah. Can you imagine getting like animal hair stuck in your throat every time you need to brush your teeth? That would suck. Finally, in 1939, DuPont reveals what we all associate with nylon: stockings. First nylon stockings were a huge hit. They sold all 4,000 pieces that they had in stock right away, and the sale was only open to wives of DuPont employees. It wasn't even open to the public. Why were they so popular, and why did everyone want them so badly? Well, they were replacing silk. So we're going from silk stockings to nylon stockings. Silk stockings were way less stretchy, they were very difficult to wash, and believe it or not, the silk stockings were more prone to snags than the nylon ones. I don't even know why they bothered. When DuPont released to the general public, their entire stock of 4 million pairs was gone in 48 hours. Fun fact, so they obviously advertised these stockings as like easy to wash, stretchier, and snag less. But people expected too much, or maybe they over-advertised and they had to walk back the whole snags less thing because I guess people got mad. Oh, and they were also way cheaper than silk stockings. man named Rex Winfield. Building on Carruthers' work in 1940, Winfield and his assistant, James Dixon, started to experiment with terephthalic acid, hypothesizing that its greater molecular symmetry would produce better results than Carruthers' polyester experiments. And by 1941, they had discovered or invented, which word do you think should be used here? Terylene or polyethylene terephthalate, more colloquially known as polyester. So while polyester is finally being invented over in Nylonville, DuPont is rounding the corner on the nylon stocking market and have locked down 30% of it in their first 2 years of business. But then the war came and nylon was plucked from women's legs and fed to the war machine, which turned the newfangled fiber into all kinds of things like parachutes, glider tow ropes, tire cords, mosquito nets, flak jackets, whatever those are, shoelaces, and much more. Because the supply chain for things like silk and cotton were disrupted, the demand for synthetics exploded, and the production was heavily dependent upon. Some even called nylon the fiber that won the war. When it was announced in 1945 that DuPont would be changing gears back to producing stockings with its nylon, it became clear the fighting spirit hadn't quite left America. 40,000 women lined up for 13,000 pairs of stockings in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the inevitable ensued, fighting over nylons, or stockings. Nylon stockings. These were a big deal back then. During the war, when they were totally unavailable, department stores sold makeup and had counters where you could get nylons painted on. From humble laboratory beginnings in the first half of the last century to now, polyester has become the most produced and used fiber on the planet, covering it in plastic, filling our landfills, and polluting our water, food, air, and organs with microplastics. But we'll talk about all that stuff in part 2. For now, how did polyester become so ubiquitous? Short answer, we got busier, and then we got cheaper. In that order. Long answer, well, without the help of polyester, clothing is actually a lot harder to take care of. It's highly likely you didn't know that because most of the clothes in your closet have some polyester in them. And if they don't, you probably know which ones they are because they're more expensive and probably special. So when the women's lib movement and second wave feminism began to really take hold in the Western world in the 1960s and 70s, a few things happened a little bit at once, some one after the other. First of all, companies that had grown either with the war effort or in the economic boom post-war now had larger than ever advertising budgets, and they took full advantage of the possibilities. Which inevitably worked and led to more consumer spending. And this legacy has only grown since then. I mean, look around your house. Unless you're a minimalist, which is a rebellion spurred by this very issue, you have more stuff in your house than most people did half a century ago. Second, more women who would have otherwise been housewives were going to work. And of course, their husbands weren't pitching in with the housework, so clothing that didn't need to be ironed and sweaters that didn't accidentally shrink in the wash were a godsend. They and their husbands could go to work in their sensible polyester or polyblend suits without having to worry about finding the time for ironing. Polyester was marketed as a miracle product, and people ate it up. Third, the countercultural movement that accompanied second wave feminism at this time rejected being told what to wear. They didn't want their wardrobe and look to be dictated to them, so they rebelled and birthed streetwear and youth fashion. And fourth, the American lifestyle or Western lifestyle became more relaxed or leisurely, and it began to demand more leisurely clothes. Now, this is a story about the middle and lower classes. Polyester, even at peak pre-fast fashion popularity, was always looked down upon by the upper classes, as one of its major draws is affordability, and one of the major barriers to natural fiber was the cost, the high cost. And this is still the case, kind of. Actually, one of the definitions that I found when I was looking up definitions for polyester for the beginning of this video was, what was it? Let me look it up. Ah yes, polyester. Characterized by inelegant or unsophisticated middle-class taste. Ooh, Damn, that's snobby. Oh man. Characterized by inelegant or unsophisticated middle-class taste. Like, it couldn't be just unelegant and unsophisticated taste. It has to be unelegant, unsophisticated, middle-class taste. Like, if you're unelegant and unsophisticated but you're high class, then, like, you're fine. So in the 60s and 70s, polyester is a money-saving miracle for the middle classes, especially the liberated women therein. But by the 80s, it has gone out of fashion again. This may be difficult to understand today because polyester no longer has a specific look or even texture. But in the first 40 years of its life, it didn't change that much, especially relative to its next 30. So while polyester was having a party in the 60s and 70s, cotton production had actually progressed and improved, giving it space to have a comeback in the 80s, therefore making polyester unfashionable. And that's when polyester somewhat quietly moved overseas and into the background of our lives. In Asia, it found new life as an investment opportunity. It was improved upon becoming stretchier, more comfortable, and stealthier. It blended. Polyester was mixed with any and every fiber it could get its plastic little hands on. It promised to make them less wrinkly, more washable, more stain resistant, and cheaper. Designers discovered that they could make more money by sneaking polyester into their clothing. Then, clothing got cheaper. So, skills like sewing and mending became less necessary because if something ripped or stained and it was cheaper to replace it than fix it, it got replaced. Knowledge of different kinds of textiles and what makes a quality piece of clothing began to fade because when something's cheap, we don't really ask how it's made or what's in it. Case in point, the hot dog. Not to mention, in a world full of synthetic blends, fibers being rapidly invented, greenwashing, the words printed on tags these days have little meaning to most people. And so now we've found ourselves in a vicious cycle of demanding more and more for lower and lower prices. And that, my friends, is fast fashion. And that's it. I'd like to read for you a quote from this book, The Golden Thread by Kasia St. Clair. It's all about the history of textiles and how they've impacted human history. And this is what she says about polyester. Today's large mass-market fashion brands rely on synthetic fibers. Without them, fast fashion probably wouldn't exist. Synthetics are cheap, quick to produce, and can be readily made to order in exact quantities, color, and prints in time for the fortnightly, weekly, or even daily drops of new clothes that the largest, most successful brands such as Zara, H&M, and Topshop demand. So there you have it, the history of polyester from the laboratory to global blanket, and within it the history of nylon and the rise of fast fashion. Join me in part 2 and I'll be discussing the more practical side of this juggernaut. I'll talk about how it's produced in modern days, where and at what cost, its environmental impact, and some possible solutions, if I find any. And of course, I'll also be talking about why it's so useful in a little more depth than I did today, even though it is terrible for the environment. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. You're a champ and now very well informed on the history of one more fiber. Be sure to check out my playlist of all the videos I've made about different fibers, textiles, what have you. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Question, further information, or just your thoughts in general. Before you go, if you're interested in how textiles have affected world history, like me, I highly suggest checking out these books, which I relied on heavily for this video. And I will for the next video as well. But there's so much more in these books than I can add into a video. The Golden Thread by Kasia St. Clair, which I read to you from. The Fabric of Civilization, How Textiles Made the World by Virginia Postrel, and Overdressed, The Shockingly High Price of Cheap Fashion by Elizabeth L. Klein. Okay, thanks for watching and see you later.